there is one incident response pocket guide. Yeah. And that in itself is an amazing accomplishment that we're literally using the same page, especially with things like how to properly refuse risk. Like that's a page in the IRPG.
Right.
That in itself is just amazing in terms of culture and workforce and being able to reference the same thing. This is the Wildfire Lessons Podcast, where we promote learning by revealing the complexity and risk in the Wildland Fire Service. We share the lessons. The learning that follows is up to you. Hello, this is Travis Dotson from the Wildland Fire Lessons Learned Center. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about a handful of incidents and accidents and what people learned from these events and passing on the lessons to you. We're going to be using the annual incident review summary as our guide to walk through these lessons and share the learning with you. So let's get to it. Welcome, Erik. Good to see you.
Thanks. Good to see you too, Travis.
Who do we have here today?
We have Erik Apland, the acting ops manager for the Wildland Fire Lessons Learned Center. Yeah, that's nice. Right. Big deal now.
Oh, and I'm Travis. I'm Travis Dotson, and the analyst at the Wildland Fire Lessons Learned Center. And what are we going to be talking about today?
Today is our podcast, Lessons from 2024. So I'll look back at the fire season that was 2024.
Sweet. Few things to talk about there. But I did have one question for you, Erik, before we get started. So what did you get accomplished last week?
I will be deferring that answer. Actually,
okay. You're going to answer.
Yeah,
that.
Looking for further guidance.
Copy. Yeah, on what it. Yeah, I just I think it's important for us to acknowledge that whole thing, and it and if people didn't quite catch that, it's kind of a federal employee. I don't know if it's a joke. Is that too soon?
It might be at this point.
Yeah. Okay.
Because we don't know what the punchline is yet.
That's right. Maybe it's not a joke. It's just an acknowledgement, right? That it is late February of 2025, but it got me thinking about the federal footprint in wildland fire, right? Because I think we're pretty good about acknowledging that the work that we do is not solely for federal folks.
Oh, absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
we serve everybody, and wildland fire is so full of all kinds of different people. It's not just federal employees. Mm-hmm. Now, the other side of that is that there is a pretty large influence from federal entities in wildland fire. It's easy to think about resources, right? Like number of firefighters, that kinds of, you know what I mean?
Sure.
And this like, primary firefighters aren't in danger of, losing their jobs, and that I think intuitively makes sense. Like, okay, it's the workers on the ground, but if that's not true of the other part of the federal workforce, what is it that we start to see impacts on? And I was thinking of real like systematic things that the federal organization provides, right?
Sure.
And just like a real tangible thing is the IRPG.
Oh, wow. Yep.
But just think about the IRPG. This is a thing that everybody knows, right? It's not like, if you work for a state,
right,
you don't know what the IRPG is,
right? Or you have your own or something like that.
Yeah, no, like there is one incident response pocket guide.
Yeah,
and that in itself is an amazing accomplishment that we're literally using the same page, especially with things like how to properly refuse risk. Like that's a page in the IRPG.
Right.
That in itself is just amazing in terms of culture and workforce and being able to reference the same thing. When I'm in Florida or in South Dakota or in California, right? Like the same sheet of music is pretty amazing, right?
Yeah.
And so then you think about, how does that thing exist? How is it that little book exists? And that kind of structure, I mean, it's the same thing with task books, right? Those aren't primary firefighter positions
No.
that are working on that thing.
Definitely not.
And it's a living document, right? Every, what is it, 3 years, I think?
IRPG, I think so, yeah.
But we all know that it changes because the
color changes, right?
Yeah. Color, right? Like, ooh, what color is it this year?
Yeah.
And again, there's intention behind that, right? To signify that this is a different one.
Right.
And the reason it changes is because there's a committee that works on that, says, hey, is this outdated? Do we need to add this? And it's a super tough job because everybody wants their thing to be in the IRPG.
Right.
But that committee has to make these really difficult decisions. It'd be one thing if the content never changed, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Then we could think about the efficiency of how do we just crank that thing out.
Yeah.
But when you go to change the IRPG, everybody needs to have a voice, right? And so these NWCG, National Wildfire Coordinating Group committees intentionally have representatives from all the different groups, and they have this crazy tough job of curating that content and getting it out on time. But those are the types of things that's a very federally driven thing.
Yeah.
Orchestrated, you know what I mean?
Right. Which makes sense because, the federal government exists across the entire landmass of the United States, right? It wouldn't make sense for Minnesota DNR to operate it or something like that because they're located in one place. And so it makes sense. It's like, well, who can be the coordinating group of agencies to take this on and not oversee it, but to facilitate it?
For sure,
right?
For sure. And that's just one instance that's like easy to point to because it's like it's in our pocket.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think it also illustrates like I'm so glad that the IRPG exists. I think it's really useful.
Absolutely.
It's come in handy for me personally. And when people come to our workforce from another workforce, they're just like, this is amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. Like it's all in a little book and it fits in your pocket. Not everybody has that.
Oh, definitely not. Yeah.
And it's the same thing with task books. It's the same thing with curriculum, right? The content of courses. Like right now, the chainsaw curriculum is being overhauled.
Right.
It's going from a single class, a 200 class S212, and it's a long-term process, but it's going to be S112 and S212 and S312. Like, again, same thing, right? And either way, everybody that wants to run a chainsaw on a wildland fire, literally gets the same curriculum and taught. Language is such a big part of it, right? And those are the things that I think of that will falter, and have those impacts as we see. And I'm sure it'll shift. That that's part of what we do is we adapt and overcome. But when I think of that line of like, well, the primary folks aren't. It's easy to say that's the most important thing, and there's this other side of things that provides structure. That, man, I struggle to imagine what things would look like if that structure starts to erode.
Oh, absolutely.
And of course, from a risk management perspective, like that starts to get kind of like, ooh, I don't know, I get worried.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would think without that, you would see incidents being managed in really different ways, and not necessarily using the same kinds of language where words have really different meanings depending on where you are. I think you're totally right. And I think the way that the system is working right now, when things don't work, when things don't work in a serious way, that's an aberration. Like that's something that becomes known. Like, oh, did you hear what happened on this fire where these two entities didn't get along, and that this agency got kicked off the fire, whatever. Yeah, we hear about that because it's pretty rare.
Yeah.
And without that, I think it's easy to focus on the things sometimes that don't work and not look at, like, I don't know, in my experience, we're like going to a fire, particularly an initial attack, but it's the same on extended attack large fires with teams assigned. But going to an initial attack fire, and there's volunteers and there's state, and I would be there with either a federal engine or a federal dozer or something like that, and we all know what we're doing.
Yeah.
We're on the same page, and we talk basically the same language, and if you want to take that, we'll take this. Okay, here we go. I'd say, my experience is that vast majority of the time it works out really well, and we know what the objectives are, and we achieve them together. And when that doesn't happen, again, I think that's pretty rare, but that's because of coordination and intention to create that kind of a system.
Yeah, that intention's been around for
decades.
Yeah, and it was recognized, and it's like, hey, we need to get on the same page, and we need to have structure and organization and stuff like that. And sometimes I think we do forget to acknowledge the miracle, right? It's like, oh, the lunches were bad on that fire. Mm-hmm. True, and let's work on that. And you were provided a lunch.
Yeah.
On a fire, like the logistics of that happening when you go, you know what I mean? Like, yes, there's a contract, you know what I mean? But it's like, we feed thousands of people in a relatively short period of time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And isn't it great that what we have to do now is improve the quality of the contents versus
right.
We're not struggling with getting people food.
Yeah.
That's usually not the struggle. It's what's in the bag.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, right. You come to a place where oftentimes it's in a really rural area. Like I think about the Dixie Fire a few years ago up in Plumas County in Northern California. They had a fire camp there that was larger than the town of Quincy.
Yeah.
It's like, that was it was its own. East Quincy now had a town at the fairgrounds and was feeding, housing, showering, doing laundry, providing fuel, all of those things for thousands of people to then go out and perform a job together. Like, yeah, that's pretty amazing. Are there, times when that system doesn't work maybe as best as it could? Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
It's totally true. But
and those are the types of like, that infrastructure stuff and there's always forward thinking. There's people making adjustments. That's one of the things I love about wildland fire culture is it is so centered on learning, right? Mm-hmm. And adapting and overcoming. And I recognize there's a whole group of people that don't value that as much. They're like, no, we should, pick this era, or things used to be better when, what I mean.
Sure.
But it's so baked into our culture. The Pulaski, like that was an improvement, right? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? That was built, specific to, right? And that concept has always stuck with us. It's in our culture, and like, hey, how could we improve things? And that improvement is hand in hand with learning, right? Which is
Completely.
It's. You can't have one without the other.
Yeah.
And that constant advancement is just kind of how we roll, and it's always happening. And like this, and we're willing to take on enormous things. Like look at complex incident management. Another thing that maybe it's not so popular, but man, we're willing to be like, hey, let's try something. Different. And let's do it at scale.
Exactly.
I think that spirit isn't acknowledged often enough.
Yeah.
And it is part of who we are. And I love that. I think that's
100%.
Ultimately it's a good thing, because everybody that has had any sort of career can look back and go, man, like, look at some of the progress we've made.
Oh my gosh, absolutely.
On certain things. And I think we've talked about this on podcasts before, but anyway, in uncertain times, I tend to go back to grounding things, and those are some of the things that I just I love about our workforce and our culture, and I worry about.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because that structure is so federally supported.
Yeah.
Like, man, things would be different if that structure wasn't there, or it was weakened.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
It would almost, that'd be even harder in some ways.
Right. Then if it just went away and now there was a vacuum. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Which would be filled. But if it's not a vacuum, if we're still overseeing or coordinating kind of a policy and all those types of things, but we have greatly diminished capacity, that's not good.
Yeah. Because the expectation remains.
Absolutely.
Of
and the
it,
authority,
sure,
the responsibility. That's all still there.
Yeah.
But now you're unable to do it.
Capacity is
down. Yeah, that's a bad situation.
All right. Well,
yeah, just a good acknowledgement of reality and what's going on right now. I think that's important.
What we're living in.
Yeah.
And it's within our mission, right, to reveal the complexity and risk within the wildland fire environment. That's part of it.
Yeah.
So speaking of risk, and complexity, let's get into the review summary.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, do you want to start with just a brief description of what the review summary is for folks that maybe aren't familiar with that particular document that we produce? And I say we, and it's mostly you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's Wildland Fire last year in 10 pages.
There it is.
But it's not Wildland Fire. It's Wildland Fire lessons, which mostly come from incidents and accidents and reports, right? But it's our being the Wildland Fire Lessons Learned Center's attempt at summarizing, consolidating a calendar year of incidents, accidents, lessons from those things into a manageable size and highlighting, right? It's our job to comb through all that stuff, read it and go, wow, this lesson, we haven't seen it before, or we've seen this a bunch of times. And so we summarize it, and then it's really aimed at utility for line going fire folks, and anybody should be able to pick this thing up and either just talk through it with their crew and get something, or the way I think it gets used the most is as part of the annual refresher.
Yeah, RT-130.
Yeah, RT-130, man. You can pick this thing up. If somebody says, hey, Travis called in sick again, I need you to teach the refresher today. You know what I mean? Or another version of that, which is like, oh, hey, I forgot to prepare for this.
Yeah, exactly.
I wonder what I should cover.
Exactly.
You should be able to pick this thing up and go, all right, let's talk about, fatalities or hit by tree or whatever's in there. And there's discussion questions in there that are related to the content.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so it's not quite a refresher in 10 pages, but it can serve along those lines.
A lot of content. Yeah. And I mean, it's funny. I don't think I told you this, but really recently, the unit that I came from, I got an email from one of them, actually the guy who ended up getting my job when I left to come to the Lessons Learned Center. And he said, hey, man, you're still local. Can you come and help with RT-130? I'm like, actually, I'm out that whole week. But I was like, here, check this thing out. And then, a few minutes later, he was like, oh, this is great. Thank you. We don't need you anymore. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Never mind.
Yeah. So yeah, totally. I mean, it was very serendipitous because I thought, oh, Travis be happy about that.
Yeah. And I know people use it because people start emailing me and calling me.
Right.
In December.
Where is that thing?
In November. You know what I mean? They're just like, hey, how soon do you get it done? I'm like, what? The calendar year has to be done, before I get it done. But it's awesome. That's a great problem to have, right? Because exactly. We know it's getting used. Right on. Should we jump into the content?
Absolutely. So page one of this year's and, there's a cover page, but the first content page is usually fatalities, right? So that's the first topic that we want to cover. And I guess I'll let you take it away with what do you have to say about fatalities in the year 2024 in wildland fire?
I think we say in here only one of the past 10 years has had a lower number of fatalities than 2024. And there's a lot of different ways to have conversations around that.
Right.
Right. And there's just, man, that's part of why I put those graphs in there. People want to know for a lot of different reasons. Ultimately, I choose to think that people want to know because they care.
Yeah.
Not only about themselves, but about their fellow fire personnel.
Yeah.
Right. So anyway, I put this stuff out there because and put things in there like only 1 year in the past 10 years had fewer fatalities, because people right away want to start making sense of it.
Yeah.
And I think
sure.
the conversation that ensues, I don't know that anybody's going to answer that question with any sort of certainty, but I think the conversation is helpful.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
people right away, they'd be like, oh, why do you think that was? Was there not as many fires? Was there not, you know what I mean? And we don't know. We don't have a system to, I know that somebody asked me that question recently, like, hey, is there a way to show when there's strain on the system?
Oh, like a PL5 type thing?
Yeah,
or something
exactly.
Like
Like whenever there's more UTFs unable to fill, does that track with injuries and fatalities?
that's interesting.
You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
it's like, those are great questions to have. We can't answer that because we don't,
Right.
track at that level, partly because of the interagency nature of
Right. Yeah.
But I think those are good conversations to have. And in a classroom, people can be like, yeah, why was it that in 2019 there was 9 fatalities?
Yeah.
And this year there was 11.
Yeah.
Last year there was 13, and people start being able to use their fire experience to go like, well, I remember 2019, and
It was that was a quiet year. I remember 2019.
Yeah.
But
Right.
that doesn't necessarily mean, even in quiet years, we still do prescribed burning, we still drive, we still fall trees. There's all those things.
Absolutely. And you have one big event,
Yeah.
right?
Totally.
I mean, 2013,
Yeah, exactly.
it's off
Exactly.
the charts.
Yep.
And so it doesn't always work that way.
No.
And I put the trend line in there, right? And even that is, it's interesting because it's numbers, right? And it's affected by how far you zoom out. So anyway, this year specifically, the fatalities that did occur, we didn't have any like wild outliers in terms of how they occurred.
Right.
But we did have a late season fatality that was heartbreaking. It was in November, I believe.
November, yeah.
In New York.
Yeah.
On a wildland fire. Somebody, a limb fell down and struck and killed a young firefighter.
Yeah.
Like in New York.
Yeah. In November.
In November, yeah.
Yeah.
Like that's crazy.
Yeah. And I went to, in preparation for this, I went to look at our database on the website, what we call our Incident Review Database, or IRDB, and that was the 7th reported incident that we have in the IRDB going back to 1908 or whatever. That's only the 7th that we have from the state of New York.
Oh, wow.
So, we do occasionally get stuff from New York, especially recently. We have been getting a little bit more, but yeah, it's certainly not common. And the previous ones were summer, when you would expect.
Yeah. So that stands out to me. There was a UTV rollover fatality. We didn't used to see those because we didn't use UTVs.
Sure.
Yep. But and I think we've talked about that quite a bit last year. But yeah, it was all types of events that we've seen in the past, and I think those conversations are good to have, and I think we have some prompts in there about medical. What do you think when you hear medical fatality? And I think there's part of what I'm getting at is that in that realm, I think people get a bit judgy. And they
Absolutely.
start, you know what I mean, like, oh, heart attacks. It's all heart attacks, and it's the bad people not taking care of their health. You know what I mean? Which I feel like is a dangerous view.
Oh yeah,
right? Because it's them.
Yeah. It's another version of, well, they got entrapped because they're bad firefighters.
Yeah.
Same thing.
And then one of the unique things in that medical fatality count was we did have a line of duty death that was a presumptive illness, cancer. So somebody had been diagnosed with cancer, and they went through the process of the presumptive illness designation, right? Now that Wildland Fire has that, and they were approved for the program, and they said, yes, this meets the criteria. This more than likely is work caused, right? And so and this employee subsequently died from the cancer. That was attributed to the work.
Right.
In the Wildland Fire arena.
Right.
And so that's the first time that we've recorded that version of a line of duty death,
right.
You know, and again, I'll go back to our mission, because I know that people have opinions on whether or not that should count or not, or Definitely. Is there utility in acknowledging that, or not acknowledging it, but, you know, in this instance, like, and again, if we're revealing the risk and complexity in the wildland fire environment, like, man, that is very much a part of it.
Oh, yes. Yes.
And so it is recorded in our numbers.
Yeah.
We're not the only entity that keeps a count of wildland fire fatalities, and there's other entities that have intentionally not included it. And that's okay. Numbers can be different. But yeah, that was a unique thing. It would only make sense that we're going to see more of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, because this whole presumptive illness thing is that program or system or whatever is relatively new, and so we've already seen one this year.
Right. Yeah.
An additional one.
Right.
So that's another thing to consider and maybe talk about in refreshers.
Absolutely. And I think it's very important. I mean, you talked about, you know, revealing risk and complexity. You know, there was a time when in the not that distant past where really a huge focus of wildland fire, of looking at safety, of looking at risk, was really around entrapment. And we've been progressing or including more arenas to say, well, we need to really look at tree strikes. We need to really look at, you know, vehicle accidents, and we need to, for instance, have a system to make sure that people are in that their heart can take the physical exertion that it takes to be a wildland firefighter, and all of these things. Well, you know, the research on particularly cancer, but other illnesses, my understanding is it's pretty unequivocal. And, you know, you can, like you said, you can argue about, well, should a chronic illness be included in 1 year's particular stats? I agree. That's a totally legitimate conversation and debate to have that could, you know, really elucidate the topic. On the other hand, what does that mean for you and decreasing your exposure to products of combustion, smoke, fuel, all that kind of stuff this year, this fire season, on this fire, because that's one of the things that it's going to take, right? You have to decrease your exposure to these things that we know cause cancer, which is, I think, a great reason to talk about it and to include it.
Yeah. Don't run the rig in the bay.
Yeah. Where you're making ice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, there are some very tangible lessons here, right? That diesel exhaust, that's bad stuff, man. You know, don't store your gear right next to it, you know? In fact, like, get it, you know, start making noise about why don't we have these exhaust systems, you know what I mean? That
Totally.
Get that stuff out of there.
Yep.
And then, like, fire camp, right? Like,
Yep.
oh man, the inversion, like it's scarier to me than anything now, because there's just all these rigs, you know what I mean?
Under the inversion.
Yeah, under the inversion.
Oh, God.
And they're all out there idling.
I never even thought about that. Oh, no.
Right. Like you're in the valley, and we complain about the wildfire smoke.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's definitely
It's
a problem.
bad, yeah.
Yeah. But what we've included in it, right, under that layer is all this diesel exhaust.
Yeah, generators and vehicles.
Yeah. And we're sleeping in it, and you know what I mean? We're just basically like rolling around in it like a dog in mud, you know what I mean? Like
Totally.
Yeah. And dirty Nomex it's not cool. All of that stuff. And I know, whatever, I'm like an old guy now saying that stuff, but there's a lot more data to support that kind of stuff, and it's real deal. Like, you know, people are dying. Exactly. Again, these aren't numbers, man. These are people.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And so, yeah.
Exactly. And I think there is a certain amount. I mean, again, this is a live debate and conversation that's going on at multiple levels. And I'm not saying that my opinion is correct or whatever, but I do feel like one of the effects potentially of separating out these particular people that we lost from the other people that we lose from wildland fires is that they go on a different list, and we don't necessarily look at that list because those weren't the people that wasn't the hit by tree, that wasn't the entrapment. And so it's so much easier to think of the proximate cause, the proximate risk that's going to cause me harm today. Sure. And there's that other list of people that got sick. Yeah. You know what I mean? I think there's risk in that. And
I think that, you know, it's easy to take the perspective that, life causes cancer. Therefore I'm just going to do whatever I do and I can't actually deal with that, right? Because it's not tangible. And I guess what I'm saying, and from a Lessons Learned Center perspective, is there is some concrete stuff, right? You know what I mean? Like move the ice machine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You know what I mean? There are some things you can do. And as a supervisor that's using leadership principles, and it's not even supervisor, any leader, right? Anybody at any level of the organization has a responsibility, has a duty, right? That's one of our core values, to be thinking about themselves and their fellow firefighters, fire personnel, right? Is like, we need to be thinking about that because we care about the other people that work next to us.
Exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, I do think that it brings it, at least for us and our mission, it's important to include it in the conversation. Yeah. And share lessons about it.
Yeah. And I think if we hadn't included it as a fatality this year in our list, it would be harder to have this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. What's next?
Yeah. All right. So moving on, we have hit by tree incidents in 2024.
It's always a thing, right? Like firefighters get hit by trees. The one of the unique things this year, I don't know if it's really unique, but every year there is a difference between, right, somebody getting hit by a tree in the process of falling a tree, right? And then there's the other super scary one, which is like a random tree. Nobody was cutting on anything,
right?
And it falls. And as far as the way that I've been tracking them over the years, it's usually around 50%, half and half. I remember the first time that I discovered that, I was just baffled.
Interesting. Yeah.
You know, and this year it was, there was 14 non-tree felling ops instances and 10 during tree felling ops. So it wasn't exactly, but that's always been the case. There's been one, a year where a little more on this side, and then a year where but it always hovered around 50%, and it's fairly close. I will acknowledge that there's other people going back and interpreting data, and there's groups out there that are saying that it's actually not 50%. It's actually way more where tree felling wasn't happening, right? That there was more, and who knows, who's right. I think we'll get better and better at figuring that stuff out as we get better with reporting. But I think for us, it remains, look, this happens a lot. People get hit by trees, and it happens when people are falling trees and when people aren't falling trees. And the lessons regarding those are different, and the path forward for those are different. And I know there's a little bit of talk of this, like, well, we're putting all this effort into trying to get better at chainsaw operations, you know, almost as a fix. At least some people say that this reorganizing the chainsaw curriculum is an effort at reducing the number of hit by tree injuries. And I don't know that that's the only motivation for it. I think sometimes curriculum is due for an upgrade.
Yeah.
Just and that's not the only effort. But I do know that when people get hit by trees, the lessons are often about chainsaw operations. Tree felling, right? Which makes sense because we can control it.
Right.
It is a very tangible thing.
Right.
And people are still getting, like, lots of people are getting hit by trees while that's happening.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
right.
It's not like that doesn't happen.
No, of course. Yeah.
And it is harder to deal with that other segment of the random tree falling. And I do think that there's people putting real intentional thought behind that. The Canadians use a completely different system, and there's a lot of talk about that, you know, about, like, you know, having a certification or a qualification and going in and clearing an area before any other workers come in,
right?
To try and address that. And I think that's great to be talking about that and looking at it and seeing how we can start to deal with that other half, because I think that the perception is that, well, nothing is being, it's like, oh, that's hard, let's just put our head in the sand and keep focusing on chainsaw ops.
Right.
And I also think that certain curriculum is the vehicle. Like, when you go to a chainsaw class, you talk about way more than just chainsaw operation.
Oh, definitely.
Right. You talk about,
I mean, you talk about trees and you know, signs of weakness in trees and all that kind of stuff, and differences between species of trees, and, you know, ones that are more susceptible to root rot or something like that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that's the space where those conversations happen.
Right.
Right. And I feel like another approach is we could be more welcoming of who it is we invite to that class. You know what I mean? Because a lot of people don't go to that class because they don't want anything to do with chainsaws.
Sure. Yeah.
But there's other things to learn there.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that if that curriculum starts to incorporate more of that stuff, maybe we should, you know, be more inclusive in terms of who goes to that class and comes to that class and is made to feel comfortable in that class.
Right.
Because of some of that other stuff that's in there. Right. And learning is awesome, and it's fun, and it, you know what I mean? It helps us with perspective, and maybe people that don't run a chainsaw can still benefit from that stuff, and you know, the chainsaw crowd might benefit from some outside perspective as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Or questions, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
no, I mean, I think there is maybe a perception sometimes that things have really changed, and we're losing a connection to the forest, or we're losing a connection to having I don't know, like a growing up in the woods.
Oh, like the city kids. Oh, people get hit by trees now because it's a bunch of city kids that are looking at their phone and they're not paying attention to the trees.
They're on Instagram.
They were probably on Instagram when the tree fell, and that's why they didn't, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Obviously, I'm making fun of that perspective.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, in looking at old accounts of accidents that were reported on wildland fires, this is absolutely one of the most common things that's always happened, regardless of the year. And, you know, you can say, like, well, at this time the workforce looked like this, at this, you know, and over the years, over the decades, it has changed dramatically what our workforce looked like, who we were drawing from, what size of the workforce we had as we became more professional, blah, 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 all these different things. Regardless of any of that, this always happens.
People have been getting nailed by trees for a long time.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. A long time, you know, and the people that you would think, like, oh, well, particularly, I guess, coming from the Forest Service side of things, and, you know, many of us in the Forest Service become indoctrinated in the Forest Service traditions and all that kind of stuff, and having this reverence for those things, and thinking about some of those people. And I just think about this one particular case that I read about, where it's like a guy that had been on every fire in the last 20 years or something like that in this local area, hit by a tree that fell from the green. He was on the line and it fell from the green from the other side. Mm-hmm. And it's like, yeah, that's what it means to be in the woods.
Yeah.
There's hazards all over the place, and they're not necessarily, the ones that you're looking at in the fire or, the tree felling operation.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, there was a period of time where I was real passionate about saying, the fix to that is don't be under the trees.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that's the 100% fix, I suppose.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. People don't often get hit by trees on grass fires.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Turns out.
Very true.
Like, their situation awareness must be just amazing.
Astronomical. Yeah, totally. Totally.
I don't know if you can get hit by a Palo Verde.
Yeah.
I'm sure you could.
Really big manzanita.
Yeah.
There's some big ones, I will say.
Oh, God. There's manzanitas that I do not want to get hit by.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. But, all right.
Any specific events as far as hit by tree incidents that you want to cover, or sort of lessons from those events, or
when the road guard's vehicle got hit by a tree, man, it's real hard not to just go on a joke roll about that.
Yep.
You know what I mean? But it's like, again, you're putting trees down.
Yep.
Communication's really important, and there's a lot of different things that go on in that, right? And same thing with they're doing a soft certification, right? And the certifier's truck gets hit. And it's like, oh my gosh, that's so fun to make jokes about. Mm-hmm. And it illustrates that, look, man, like, this is not exact science, right? And it's super dynamic. And as much as I struggle sometimes with the consistent response being like 2.5 tree lengths. That's why we got to stay 2.5 tree lengths. Yep. You know what I mean? There is some math involved in that.
Yeah.
About like, man, if you stay out of the strike zone of that particular tree, again, you have to know 2.5 tree lengths. You have to know which tree.
Yeah, right.
Right?
Yeah.
That's why it doesn't work for everything.
No, right.
It only works when you have
one tree that's being worked on right now, or one hazard tree that's known, or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
The tree that's burning at the base or something.
Whatever it is, that is a requirement of being 2.5 tree lengths is the tree.
Good point. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because people say that when there's like, oh, there was a crew that was doing prep work. Mm-hmm. And there's like 4 or 5 saw teams. Everybody's running a saw.
Yeah.
Right. And they're like, well, they weren't 2.5 tree lengths. Like, from which one?
yeah, exactly. You couldn't really be on the line.
Yeah, I had a saw team on either side of them.
Right.
Like, oh, okay, let's all move in unison.
Yeah,
that
totally.
would be impressive, right? Like, okay, all of us are gonna, he's cutting a tree that's not the same size as the other one.
Exactly.
Like, I don't know.
No, I started imagining like one of those GIS exercises where you buffer, and it's like you have this big bubble moving around.
Yeah.
Ends up being probably a pretty big area.
And then there was another one that was happening during training. And again, it's just like, man, you're cutting a tree, mm-hmm. and the risk is real all the time. And it's that classic dilemma. People say, oh, well, you got to have the experience. Oh, that just cracks me up when people say that. Well, they're not experienced enough. Mm-hmm. How do you get experience?
Exactly.
Like, come on, man. Like, at some point we should be laughing at ourselves.
Yeah.
For saying that as the answer to everything.
Yeah.
Because you have to get experience.
Yeah. And then when you have experience and something happens to you, there's an answer for that too.
Yeah.
Maybe it's complacency or something like that. It's like, they didn't because they're so experienced, they didn't take it seriously. It's like, all right.
Oh yeah.
What are we doing here?
Yeah. And then there's the picture of the metal hard hat.
Yeah.
That's, worth conversation. You can go and see some details about that. And I see the dent in that thing. And I'm glad that I don't wear one of those. And I know there's some details specific to that it's worth going and reading. That particular report happened at a training, and they were cutting on a hung up tree. A saw got stuck, and they're trying, and so you introduce multiple people underneath the tree. You know what I mean? It's a lot of those types of lessons, which is great to go back and review. And then when the thing happened, get other style helmets don't do that. Right. They don't. I've never seen.
They don't deform like that.
Yeah. I've never seen a plastic or Kevlar helmet with a dent in it.
No.
I've seen scratches, and I've seen them shattered.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And there's specifics in there that are worth reading. But in terms of just kind of like acknowledgement and looking and seeing those things, it's such a conversation starter again. He's like, oh, whoa.
Oh, yeah.
A metal hard hat.
Oh, yeah.
So it's worth people talking
Absolutely.
about what that means for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think taking that PPE seriously, it's a lesson in that one. That was a Colorado fire camp where they were doing that training. But other lessons as well, or other incidents as well that sort of have that same lesson about PP and taking that stuff seriously. I mean, I don't know. I just think about several years ago, I'd never had a metal hard hat. I had an old one from a relative who worked for the Forest Service in the late 60s, which is pretty cool. So it's like on my wall, but an actual one to wear. But they're pretty expensive, and the government wasn't going to pay for it. So I bought one on wish.com. And it finally came, on a boat from China. It took like a month. And I look at that thing and I'm like, well, I don't know what this is. Would this protect me? So anyway, I mean, that's sort of a silly example. But if your eye protection is sunglasses you got from the gas station, that's a wish.com metal hard hat, in my opinion. And I'm not saying that I didn't do that when I was in primary fire, because I did sometimes, But you get hit in the face with something, which is pretty common to get orbital injuries around the eyes or to lose teeth or that kind of stuff. Like, you're going to want to have actual safety glasses that are designed for impact and not sunglasses from, $15 ones from the gas station.
And that did surface in one of those. That is a lesson from this year. It's later in the section, but yeah, totally. And it's so easy to just wear whatever you got. You know what I mean? It's just like, whatever, man. I just need to have my eyes covered.
Yep.
But it turns out things react differently when they're smashed with a limb. Mm-hmm. And you don't want that stuff in your eyeball, or what I mean? Like no. There actually is, a reason why there's rated safety glasses,
right.
Again, the big bad mean regulators that are, like, I want to know what's going to happen to the glasses when I get smacked in the face with a branch, which does happen. Right. So that's a great point. All right. What else we got? Moving on. We have driving. Driving is the most dangerous thing that we do. Travel. Yeah. Is it? Mm-hmm. Is it? It is. I will agree that it is the thing we do very often. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. A lot of exposure time, just because we do it a lot. Mm-hmm. And so maybe that makes it the most dangerous thing we do because it's the thing we do the most. Yeah. I don't know. Something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
And we've talked about it before. Mm-hmm. Turns out we're actually really good drivers.
Yeah.
Right. And every year, like, super scary bad things happen. We roll rigs and crash them and all that stuff because turns out moving really fast in a big hunk of metal is, like, consequences get scary. Yeah. And bad things happen. Oh, yeah. But again, we continue to see the issue with wheels completely coming off of Type 6 engines. Yep. and this in 2024 we had a number of them, 3 different incidents. I know that's not the extent. I know there was other ones.
Sure.
We just didn't have like official reports on them, and the ones most recently had to do with a recall. But that's not the only.
Right.
I tend not to focus on that because it makes it seem like that's the only issue we've ever had. That's not the only issue. You know, we've had them for years prior to that, and it didn't have anything to do with a recall.
Right.
And again, there's a data points on it about like we don't have a real specific solution, but man, there's some best practices
Right.
that are real simple.
Right.
You know, includes a paint marker.
Right.
You know, like. And so again, just making a plug for that. UTV rollovers. There was a pretty dramatic, couple dramatic ones, but one of them, an agency administrator.
That's right.
Was a passenger and went through the windshield.
That's right. Unprescribed fire. Right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Responding to slop or a spot I can't remember, but yeah, like that's what happens.
Yeah.
You know, and operate. You know, it's just like anything. Attention being pulled a bunch of different ways.
Yeah.
Is like distracted driving or whatever. It's a thing that we do because we have radios and we talk, you know what I mean? Urgency, all of that kind of stuff. Seatbelts are a really good thing.
Yep. Helmets.
Those
are great.
Again, you know,
Yep.
and different agencies have different, I based on my job and looking at the data, like it is a really good idea to wear a DOT helmet, motorcycle helmet. Even if your agency says, no, it's okay, you can wear the plastic helmet. You know.
Yeah.
Even if your agency says that's okay.
Yeah.
Trust me, it's better. The speeds at which you know what I mean? You're no longer trying to protect yourself from a branch falling. You know, it's a different scenario.
Very. Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's a reason why motorcycles.
Yeah.
You know, it's the same thing. You know, just because the state says you don't have to wear a helmet while you're riding a motorcycle, it's still a good idea.
Yeah,
you know,
might be a thought to do that. Yeah. I mean, it kind of reminds me of the days when you would be like, say getting shuttled by helicopter into a fire, right? The helitack crew all has flight helmets, and you have your Bullard plastic helmet with your chin strap, and you're like, the guys who do this all the time have a really nice helmet.
And when the helicopter rolls over on takeoff and somebody's head gets wedged, you know, between the frame and the ground, guess what? That other helmet works way better.
Yeah.
That's the one that people survive.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And I'm not making that up.
No. I remember that.
So, and then the questions that we use, one of the things is just like, hey, what about a responsibility of a passenger? What do you, you know, I just think that's probably good to think about.
Oh man.
What can you do as a passenger? You know, manage that distraction load.
Right.
You know, it's a big one. And I know some organizations have rules about, you know, can the passengers go to sleep?
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah.
That kind of stuff. And then also just, you know, looking out.
Yeah.
Hey, like we're way over here near the soft shoulder that often gives way. You know what I mean? That right rear dual.
Yep. Exactly.
That kind of stuff. It's just, you know, it's a team sport.
Yeah, 100%. I think anybody who's been on staff calls, Lessons Learned Center staff calls with me knows this, but obsessed with like air crash investigation stuff. And what do they do in the aviation industry and commercial flying? You have 2 pilots, right? Pilot flying and pilot monitoring. And they're both those are co-equal positions.
Sure.
Where one's actually manipulating, say, the wheel, you know, the throttles, and one of them is keeping an eye on him.
Sure.
Or her and looking at and doing their own thing. And I'm not saying that, you know, it has to be like that. But, that the crew resource management concept of like, we are here together and we're on, like you said, it's a team sport. We're accomplishing this mission together. Yeah. Maybe, if it's possible, like the driver certainly can't fall asleep. Then you got a big problem.
Yeah.
But maybe also the passenger, maybe if they're falling asleep, they go in the back. You know what I mean? Back seat, not the bed.
Yeah. So what I heard you say, Eric, is that you think there should be a task book for the passenger.
Yes. Type 1, 2, and 3.
I can't do that. I'm not a type 1 passenger yet.
I'm a trainee.
I'm still a trainee, man.
Oh, my God. Yeah. Not exactly my point.
I don't know. I heard it here first.
Like just something to wrap your head around, a philosophical idea.
Okay. I'm trying to generate some momentum around you being the grandfather of the passenger.
Oh, I'd love that.
Task.
I would love that. That's my legacy.
That's your legacy, man. Oh, there was this guy, 2025, talking on some podcast. Now we have a passenger task.
There would be people that I worked with who would say, "Oh, of course."
Yeah. Oh, it makes total sense.
Makes total sense. I know him.
All right.
Yeah.
Erik Apland, father of the passenger task. Should we move on?
Yeah, moving on. Heavy equipment.
Heavy equipment. A lot of rollovers this year.
Yeah. Some pretty dramatic photos this year.
Oh, man. And some specific lessons, ones that I hadn't thought of before. So when I think of wildland fire extraction in terms of medical stuff, I usually think about getting people off the hill.
Yeah. Right.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
And in some of these, the point was brought up about extrication.
Right.
Which is different.
Right. That's like the fire department stuff.
Yes, exactly. and so there's that in itself, but then with heavy equipment, there's another layer there. Do you even know how to get somebody out of there when it's not upside down?
Yeah, right, right.
And now if it's damaged and upside down and down the hill,
yeah,
how that was really interesting, and it made me think of man, if I was a division supervisor or task force leader, I would want to at least kind of have a conversation with my operators, about that. Hey, what is, because certain enclosed cabs are designed with, ways to deal with that. And so anyway, it's just, I thought that was an interesting thing. And then some of the commonalities of tracked vehicles on rocky ground.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
yep.
how difficult that is, which of course operators and people that are around heavy equipment know that.
Sure. Yeah.
You know what I mean? But it doesn't stop us as a workforce assigning equipment to that type of terrain and then also trying to do the best we can. You know what I mean? There's
absolutely.
These operators are dialed. They're not, they don't, it's not like they were unaware of that risk, right?
No, of course.
They know this stuff, but they're out there trying to do a good job.
Yeah.
And they want to, what it made me think of is we talk about transfer of risk in the aviation realm, you know what I mean? Constantly just we're just giving aviation the risk. Oh, we can't get in there. Let's have them work with the ship or the retardant or whatever. Right. Oh, we're just transferring the risk. Mm-hmm. I think we do that with heavy equipment, but it's not as at the front of our mind, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If we have a nasty piece of ground, and we say, well, let's have or maybe it's not. It doesn't look like it's a nasty piece of ground, but it's full of shale or whatever.
Yes, exactly.
And it seems like it might be more efficient or safer, quote unquote, safer.
Yeah.
To use heavy equipment.
Yeah.
You just need somebody involved in that conversation that, number one, has the background, has the knowledge to be able to contribute to that conversation, and number two, has the power.
Yes.
Because there's this, again, there's a power dynamic in that. We've talked about it for years, the contractor's dilemma. But there is a power dynamic in those conversations, and we dance around it, and it's a social puzzle. About how it is that we talk about risk and what's possible and what's being assigned versus what's being asked about.
Right. Well, and I think we are definitely a culture where if someone asks you to do something, you are going to want to try.
Oh yeah. I tell people that all the time. It's like, be careful what you ask people to do.
Yeah.
Because they'll do it.
They'll do it. Or they'll really try pretty hard to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
And, I think risk ownership is something that has come up recently in talking about these hazards that we know exist, and saying, well, the operational resources are the ones that have the expertise, the time, and the sort of the tools to be able to manage the risk real time, and there's truth to that. But the other hand, or the other side of that is, should you be asking them to do something where you're like, well, it's on them, know? Not that I'm saying that people are doing that exactly, but I think that another part of the heavy equipment thing is because it is a specialized set of skills that not everyone can do. I can't jump in a D7 and operate that thing. There's this assumption that, like, well, they know the equipment, they know its capabilities, and then you add on the contractor thing. You're like, well, this is a professional that has whatever their experience is. They know what they're doing. And you start stacking on a lot of things that you're really asking of someone.
Yeah. You're concentrating all of that at you know what I mean, like a single. Yeah. And that's a lot of weight.
Exactly. At the tip of the spear, literally. It's all reliant on them.
Yeah, you've pushed all that risk management down. And there's also contractors out there that have zero issues telling you no, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. And so there is a spectrum, obviously. But I think there's also instances where people are just like, well, if I came here to do a job and they're saying this is the job.
Exactly. If I don't do it, why am I here?
Yeah.
So with those types of resources like heavy equipment, there's oftentimes, a lack, I guess, of those middle management positions, like a heavy equipment boss, like a task force leader, and you end up in this situation where there's not really the appropriate oversight.
Sure. And people are doing the best that they can.
Exactly. And I think that, going back to what we talked about at the very beginning of this, not every single person who's a heavy equipment boss or who has that kind of knowledge is a primary firefighter.
Oh, for sure.
So that middle management position or those positions that are just chronically underfilled on large fires, I don't really see that getting better.
Yeah, that is a very... and it makes sense. It's a militia position that is accessible.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Totally.
If you're not primary fire, you can still make it.
Yeah.
You can still...
If you come from the timber side of things.
Yeah, exactly.
This is your wheelhouse.
Exactly. And great expertise. But, I think that's... we'll see how that goes.
Yeah.
Then the other thing I wanted before we leave is we had a roller.
Yeah. Yeah, we did.
And they actually reported how difficult that was to explain what happened. Because it was a roller. That was what they were calling the piece of equipment. You know what I mean? It was during doing some road work in suppression repair. And it's a giant roller.
Right, like compacts the road, right?
They're fixing the road.
Yeah.
But it, same thing, soft shoulder, got over to one side, and soft shoulder gave, and the piece of heavy equipment that is known as a roller rolled down the hill.
Yeah.
And so think about that as your radio dilemma, right? You know what I mean? I was like, I can't wait to have that on a sand table and see what people do, right? And it's like, okay, call this in. They're like, the roller it rolled over. Like, it's, maybe people would do it great. I'm the one that would mess it up. But they did have some confusion over it. And, that you can't make that stuff up.
No,
Absolutely it's
not.
Like, so anyway, just acknowledging that. All right.
All right. Yeah. So, a big one, the classic entrapments.
Entrapments. Let's see. What did we... 14 different entrapments. And that's right on par with recent times. Lots of different scenarios. We had heavy equipment. We had ground crews, engines, a couple of ATV. The one thing that was unique was prescribed fire. Usually, initial attack is always where we see the vast majority. There's plenty of years where initial attack is the only place where entrapments were reported from.
Interesting.
I think the last 2 years, it was like 98% or something like that.
Wow. Okay.
But initial attack is where, I think it's where most entrapments occur. And I also think it's where they get reported.
Yeah.
I think that all the entrapments that occur on extended attack are in scenarios that are less likely to be reported until a shelter comes out or somebody gets hurt.
Burned. Yeah.
I think we run from fire.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think so, too.
Quite regularly.
Yeah, I think so, too.
On extended attack.
Yeah.
And it's just part of fighting fire.
Yeah.
And if you're running from fire, more than likely, your scenario meets the NWCG definition of entrapment. Right? And that's a whole other thing. But the prescribed fire, sometimes people like prescribed fire, you shouldn't have entrapments on prescribed fire. That's a planned event. And you know what I mean?
Right.
And it happens. It happens. The last time I ran the numbers, it was like 10% of reported entrapments occur on prescribed
fires. Interesting.
Fires on the ground.
Yep.
And some of the things we do on prescribed fire is different. Interior ignition.
Absolutely.
I mean, we do that a little bit on, but not to the extent, not the way that we do on prescribed fire.
I was thinking about this in preparation for our conversation here, and I think something that's added in the prescribed fire realm, obviously the conditions are typically more moderate than you would see on a wildfire, typically. But something that's added in the prescribed fire context is that I think it's relatively rare that you would have on a wildfire, say a big firing operation on a wildfire, where you're lighting off a road and launching, incendiary stuff in the middle of it. Fire effects is not necessarily at the top of the list of what you're... Now, do you want to kill every tree or whatever? No. But with prescribed fire, it's literally why you're there.
Sure.
Fire effects is what you're going for. And so, that, like you said, like the interior lighting, the being in there with, as for instance, a fire fix monitor or those types of things, spending time between the line and the fire in the fuel is probably, a little bit higher, a little bit unique to wildland fire, to prescribed fire in a way.
Yeah, it's not like divisions just walking around out there.
No.
In the black.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Or in the Green Islands or whatever.
Yeah. Monitoring fire effects, taking notes.
You don't have a task force leader out there just, be bopping around. I mean, sometimes you do, but you're like, what's that guy doing?
Right.
But in a prescribed fire, it's like everybody's doing that. Burn boss is wandering around out there, and the firing or ignition. What is it now? I almost said ignition specialist. Firing boss. Yeah. Right.
And their lighters.
And the FEMOs. Who knows how many of them.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? And the trainers and you know what I mean? Like everybody's just wandering around inside the unit.
100%. Yeah.
And it turns out okay the vast majority of the time. And I always think it's like, how often would you have that many different firing operations going on so casually? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like multiple flanks, not knowing what the other flank is really doing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? On a wildfire, you'd be like, what are they doing? You guys gotta coordinate. And like, be mad.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You see smoke coming from somewhere you don't.
Yeah.
Oh, what's going on down there? Yeah.
Yeah. But
Absolutely.
we see it and we're just like, oh, I guess those guys started.
Well, they got a little bit ahead. Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
And it usually turns out all right. But
Yeah.
it's revealing the risk and complexity, perspective matters, all of that. You know what I mean? It's just, it's a different thing. And every so often, like, you get jammed up.
Yep. Yep.
I wish I had like really good notes. Because I'm at a place where I'm just like, oh my gosh, I've been entrapped so many times, and I no longer think it's like a bad, I think it's part of how we fight fire, and I wonder if it happened to me more often on prescribed fire.
Oh, interesting.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because the times that I remember running from fire on wildfires, it's this very memorable event.
Right.
You know what I mean? But on prescribed fire, it's just like, oh, you got to bump back a little bit. Oh, oh, geez, yeah, I didn't know if I was going to get back through there or whatever.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just like, so I don't know, but it's gnarly, it's scary, and it's just it helps. Maybe going into your next burn, you can think about that, right, and go like, okay, let me kind of track this and see it and compare my attitude, and my approach.
Yeah.
And we might be able to take something with us to one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
I
think there is a certain amount of added attention to granularity of fire behavior and fire effects when you're on a prescribed
For
fire,
sure.
And maybe a little bit less so on wildfires. I don't want to oversimplify that, but I think that's true. But on the other hand, I also think about the times how cavalier I often can be or have been on prescribed fires, just stepping over the line of fire that's just been lit, or being in between strips. That's something you can do sometimes in some compact needle cast or something like that, where the flames are a few inches tall and are not moving. You don't want to be doing that on grass.
Yeah.
And sometimes, you form habits and they don't carry over from one realm to the next very well.
Right. That's right. It's pretty wild, our comfort level, right? And the going back to that granularity or the attention being paid, like, it's a different mission. Make It Black is a different mission.
Yes.
Than
very much so.
Have this much mortality. Like that's it, and your priorities shift a little bit.
Yeah.
So
definitely.
Right on. Always good stuff to talk about in that section. Scouting, continue. Just scouting.
Yeah, scouting.
Scouting.
Yep.
Again. All right.
Of course.
Lessons from the learners.
Yes.
Get a shirt that has double elbows. This is so concrete. And people get burns on the elbows.
Yep.
Fairly regularly.
Yep.
And so it makes sense. That's why those shirts exist.
Yeah, exactly.
There's two layers there. It's just like, people are like, oh, I got these Carhartts with the,
the double knee.
Double knee.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the knees wear out,
Oh, there you go.
Well, if you think double knee Carhartts are cool, then, use that same logic and like the social engineering.
Yeah. I think cool is impervious to logic, unfortunately. one of the downfalls of humans. No, that's a good point. I mean, our PPE, what we wear, it changes over time.
Yeah.
Because of incidents and because of research and so that makes total sense. Yeah. And I'm not a medical doctor, obviously, but my understanding is that burns over joints are not something that you necessarily want. So.
My understanding that burns in general are
in
bad?
general, yes, yeah. That's number one. Yes.
Check out my understanding. See that medical knowledge?
Exactly. All right, so double elbow no mix shirt.
Yeah, I'm sure you could make it too.
Yeah, Yeah, patch like a professor.
That's awesome.
Oh my god,
man! Now I need a sweater vest. All right, What else is there? We could harp on soft stretchers some more.
Yeah.
We do that fairly often.
Yeah, bang the drum on that for sure.
They're the size of a space blanket. Certain ones.
Yep.
They're extremely handy.
Yeah.
When the bad thing happens.
I was looking at them the other day online. I think a really common variation of them carries 1,000 pounds.
Yeah.
It's going to be tough to do that with fiber tape and some shirts.
Yeah. Shirts. I mean, I know I will never knock ingenuity in, right now, right? We're in the situation and we got to do something.
Yes.
It makes sense. Yeah. Build the emergency litter out of sticks and tape.
Mm-hmm. Whatever you got.
Whatever you got. And having some sort of concept of how that might come together is probably good. But it's also good to just like have the thing.
Yeah.
And I don't put that on at the responsibility of the individual.
Right.
I see that as the responsibility of the organization.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we're making some progress, and hopefully we're going to see them in the cash.
Yeah. That's right. It's supposed to be this year.
Sometime. Yeah. We'll be excited when it happens.
Mm-hmm.
But that's that's really cool if that comes to fruition. And in the meantime, there's a bunch of early adopters out there that already have them.
Yeah. I want to say they're $30 or $40. So
yeah. And we do have organizationally, like, I can tell you what kind of reducers an engine has. I guarantee you they have an 1.5 to inch reducer.
Yep.
Guarantee it.
Absolutely.
And so we do have influence over what gets carried out there.
Yes, definitely.
And like you said, knowledge creates growth. Like this is something we've learned. Oh, hey, look, these other industries use these things. They're pretty handy and they work really well. We've proven it to ourselves over and over again. So look for them in the cache, get one in the meantime, what I mean? Buy them for your organization, whatever.
Yeah.
Exhaust and flammable liquids. They don't mix them. I'm supposed to do the clap right there. I was done talking about soft stretchers, so now I am now talking about another different thing. Just sorry, just catching everybody up there. It's another thing that we see every so often, which is ignitions of a flammable liquid.
Yes.
Because it was in close proximity to some sort of exhaust.
Yes.
Whether it's a chainsaw or a pump, or in this instance, a bed-mounted debris blower.
Yes. Okay.
So, and it's easy to throw the fiber in the back of the UTV.
Oh, yeah.
Where else would you put it?
A lot better than carrying it.
Yeah, exactly. But that, exhaust ports are hot.
Very hot. Yeah.
And so, yeah.
And, honestly, even if it doesn't light, even if it doesn't get quite up to ignition temperature, you're heating that fuel up. You're creating it. You're creating pressure inside that vessel. More likelihood of, say, a geyser or something like that. So.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just like, man, just more and more I think about it. It's just like flammable liquids. Just try to be present and intentional with where that stuff's getting placed and put. And it's just like, we're so callous to it, man.
Oh, yeah.
It's just everywhere.
It's everywhere. Yeah.
Everywhere. And there's not a UTV out there worth its salt that doesn't have spilled gasoline in the back of it.
Yeah, that's right. Yep. Pine needles soaked in burn mix.
I know. And it's like, we know that. And there's some things that we can be conscious about.
Yeah.
And if you're really struggling with what people should be doing because you haven't had a roll in a while, well, clean that thing out.
Yep.
Tell me, get that.
Yep.
Get the gasoline out of the back of the UTV or the soak or what, you know what I mean? Like,
100%.
And then maybe design a system.
Now you're talking.
You know what I mean? Because I've seen some really cool ones out there.
Sure.
People, whether it's wooden slats or milk crates or what, you know what I mean? And it's designed to keep things from tipping over, but also, it's not next to the exhaust, or it's impossible to put it You know what I mean? It's
I
just,
do. Yep.
we're good at that. We like to innovate.
Yeah.
Look at the Pulaski.
Yeah. There you go.
How many times can I make that point? All right. Closing the cap on a chainsaw.
Yeah.
Do it.
Every time.
Every time. Same thing.
Yeah.
You know, and it was cool that this report, I mean, it was a bad deal. Cap didn't get closed, you know, go to throw it over their shoulder, fuel comes out, catches on fire, bad burns. We've seen it before. It's been a while.
Yeah.
We have really emphasized fuel geysering and about how to open the cap.
Yes.
Right? And we've put a lot of focus on that last
yeah, in the last 10 years, I'd say.
Yeah, exactly. But it's almost like we need to remember that closing it's really important too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And those flip if people are, you know, you do it thousands of times.
Yeah.
Of course, eventually it's not gonna.
Yeah.
It's not gonna be seated quite right.
Exactly.
And
yeah.
So it's just something we need to pay attention to.
I remember, you know, being on a hand crew and having, you know, a particular German chainsaw, particular brand of German chainsaws, and you know, having the catch stuff that we, you know, the older saws that we had that were the old style where it was full thread, always the cap was all messed up because people would open them with a scrunch. Yeah. And then the transition that was maybe, honestly, it was like 15 years ago or something, where we started doing the quarter turns. And yeah, I mean, I viscerally remember it, you know. I never did spill anything. I never did spill gas on myself, but I did spill bar oil on myself, you know. And this is, yeah, it's a real thing. And because that mechanism has not changed, then the risk or that hazard has not gone away, because it's the same thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. I have a flame resistant shirt that has a pretty significant stain down the back, and you know, talk about cool and not cool.
Yeah.
Even if people thought Dirty Nomex is cool, that Dirty Nomex is not cool. That's just cool. That, like, literally having a kick me sign on your back. You know what I mean? Like, you know, yeah, that was really embarrassing because I didn't know. You know, I felt like it was just social awkwardness.
It's like uncrustable stains on your Nomex. that kind of dirty isn't cool. What else we got for some lessons from the learners? Anything?
Chaps.
Okay.
Yeah, they work better when you wear them. Well, actually, that's the only way that they work. No, it's just it's a classic scenario. There's a gnarly picture in there with somebody's knee is all sliced up, and they ended up with 78 stitches. And it was one of those scenarios where, hey, structure protection, we got to, you know, go down to this house, but driving into it is a narrow driveway. Let me just hop out and zip a few branches off the side.
Absolutely.
Right? And because it's such a simple task, they're like, you know, I'm not going to, maybe the chaps are, who knows, right?
Probably,
you know, maybe
all rolled up,
or they're in a different bin or something.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? It's just, let me just grab the saw and zip these few things, then we'll get down to the actual work. Well, when they got down to the work, they already had the saw out, so they started doing a few things. Oh, let me just take this, let me just take that. You know, kick back into the knee.
Ugh.
Terrible.
Yeah.
Gnarly picture. Yeah. So take the time. And I think the supervisor in this instance was just like, man, you know, you get it. You know, no matter how simple the task is, just like, no, put the chaps on.
Yeah.
And we already talked about the sunglasses versus safety glasses. Yeah. And then that last page is about 20 years of heavy equipment stuff. We talked a lot about that already. You know, rollovers are a thing in all kinds of different heavy equipment. It's not just tracked equipment. You know, there's some numbers there and some questions about, I don't know, just our perception of risk and how it is that we use heavy equipment in our area and how familiar you are with it. It is a very specialized thing. Yeah. You know what I mean? And I've always kind of just been like, oh, I'll let the heavy equipment people deal with the heavy equipment. You know what I mean? Because it's a very, it's almost like I'm intimidated by it.
Sure.
You know, And I love dozer line.
Oh, yeah.
in terms of utility, right? It's probably one of the most destructive things we do out there.
Yeah.
Way worse than the fire in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
I think that's a different podcast, though.
Values at risk. At risk from what?
Yeah.
Fire? Or something else?
Yeah, the fight causes the harm. All right. Anything else?
That's all I have. That's all I have for notes. So I think, just a reminder of what this was, right? This is the annual incident review summary that's available on our website, which is, by the way, lessons.wildfire.gov.
Mm-hmm.
And super useful for, like we talked about earlier, for the RT-130. There's exercises in there that you put a lot of work into, some questions that trigger interesting discussions that you might not have had before. So that's the genesis of this whole podcast that we've been talking about. Yeah.
Good stuff. Get out there and use it and give us the feedback if you got it. And we're all about it.
Oh, yeah.
We'll see you again at some point on this podcast. I mean, we've done this one for several years now. And hopefully we get a chance to do it again next year.
I hope so.
All right.
Thanks, Travis.
Yep. Thank you. All right. There you have it, folks. A bunch of hard-earned lessons put in your ears. Now you got to go do something about it, right? Maybe reevaluate those gas station sunglasses you've been rocking out there on the fire line around the chainsaw. Or maybe look at the flame-resistant shirt you have and look into maybe one that has double elbows. Or just go clean up the UTV and get that fuel-soaked debris out from the bed and set up a system for carrying your drip torches or your jerry cans or whatever it is you got back there. The point is, you got to do something. Otherwise, you're just listening. All right, folks, take care, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you for listening to the Wildfire Lessons podcast. Don't forget to head on over to lessons.wildfire.gov to get all the latest information from the Wildland Fire Lessons Learned Center. You can subscribe to our email list and follow us on social media. Music is provided by second-generation smoke jumper Steve Baker, who always likes to keep one foot in the black. Thanks, Steve. Remember, we honor through learning.